Under the unforgiving blaze of the western sun, Jedediah's gaze pierced the empty horizon, a man weighed down by the ghosts of losses past. On this relentless afternoon, just as despair threatened to settle in, his weary steps brought him to an unexpected sight. A woman, alone and broken, her silent figure flickering at the edge of the vast desert. Naya was her name, an Apache whose eyes carried the heavy burden of a shattered soul. Jedediah, a man whose life had been carved from hardship and solitude, stood at a crossroads forged by centuries of mistrust. Offer refuge to this stranger and risk destruction, or leave her to the merciless land and haunt his conscience forever. His cabin stood isolated on the dry, barren earth, a weathered shelter clinging stubbornly amid endless shades of ochre and brown. The air was thick and breathless, carrying the dry scent of sun-baked wood and dust, broken only by the faint rustle of brittle leaves and the distant cry of a hawk circling high above. The horizon stretched widely without mercy, a harsh cradle for those who dared call this wilderness home. Jedediah himself was a man etched with scars, both visible and hidden. The recent death of his wife and child, etched deeply in the lines of his weather-beaten face, dragging him into a self-imposed exile, where only the creak of his cabin door and the whisper of the wind kept him company. Every sunset brought the pang of remembrance, every morning a quiet battle to survive. Then there was Naya, her slender form fragile against the vast emptiness, their spirit worn thin by unimaginable grief and solitude. Yet, behind her weary eyes, there flickered something fierce, a resilience unbroken despite the cruel forces that had driven her here. When Jedediah offered her water and food from his sparse stores, the air between them churned with tension. His hand lingered near his rifle, hesitation shadowing his every movement. She accepted with a tentative nod, wary yet desperately clinging to whatever sliver of hope this stranger might represent. The bitter history, lingering like a dark cloud above their ancestors' lands, pressed heavily on their silence. Neither spoke outright of the wounds between colonist and Apache, but each felt it like a scar beneath the skin. Their first shared moments were cloaked in an uneasy quiet, charged with small, careful glances and brief, measured words that barely bridged the gulf between suspicion and reluctant trust. It was during this fragile truce that disturbing news drifted in on the dry wind. Murmurs from the nearby settlement spoke of disappearances. Members of Naya's family, once vibrant with life and laughter, were now ghost stories fading into the desert. The whispering dread suggested more than hunger or wandering. They hinted at something far darker stalking the land. Compelled by a silent code of honor and a gnawing need to understand, Jedediah followed the faint, muddled tracks leading away from the burned-out fire pits where Naya's kin had once sought shelter. Splintered branches, fresh bloodstains, and scattered personal belongings marked the scene, telling a story of violence and sudden struggle that no simple famine could explain. The oppressive heat pressed down harder as the truth dawned. A shadow darker than the relentless sun cast its presence across the land. Before him lay a mystery that threatened to unravel the fragile peace between man and Apache, a secret that could ignite old wounds anew or forge a new path from the ashes. The weight of the moment settled like a storm cloud on the horizon, thick with danger and impossible to ignore. Many fellow travelers who walk these forsaken trails have told tales of how fate, or the merciless algorithms of YouTube, sometimes silently severs one's foothold in the journey. Before the next perilous turn reveals itself and the story's thread grows taut with revelation, take a moment now to make sure you're still part of our band. Check below to confirm your place with us, so none of these voices echoing through this valley are lost to the dust. Join our saga and hold fast to the unfolding legend. The news pressed heavily on Jedediah's chest as the sun sank low behind the dusty hills. His eyes, once steady and resolute, now flickered with unease. He scanned the horizon with a tightened brow, searching for something, anything, that might unravel the silence choking the land where Naya's family had vanished. Each whispered rumor from the nearby settlement weighed down his heart. Accusation, fears, suspicions tangled with his own growing misgivings. Protecting an Apache woman invited scorn and veiled threats from neighbors who spat venom at what they called the enemy. Naya sat by the fire inside Jedediah's cabin, her fingers tracing patterns in the grains of the wooden table. Her gaze was distant, shadowed with memories she dared not voice. Her lips pressed into a thin line. The empty space beneath her ribs seemed larger with every breath. She concealed truths behind steely walls, the weight of fear, of guilt, and of secrets that might reopen wounds too fresh to bear. The silence between them rattled like dry bones, each afraid to shatter the fragile peace with words that might be sharper than any bullet. Jedediah broke the stillness, voice rough as gravel. They say your people disappeared without a trace. No signs of struggle, just gone. I don't believe hunger alone took them. Naya's eyes flickered with a flash of pain, but held steady. There are things I cannot speak, things better left buried. Her voice was a whisper, fragile but firm. Not all hunters wear rifles, Jedediah. Some hunt with shadows. His jaw clenched. Outside, the faint howling of coyotes threaded through the cold desert wind like a prelude to something sinister. He rose, stepping toward the cabin's doorway, his silhouette spilling long and thin across the cracked earth. Then we need to find those shadows, he said, before they find us. Together, they pored over the sparse clues left in the derelict camp where Naya's family had last taken shelter. Broken branches scrawled across the dirt like frantic lines, footprints half erased by wind. A scrap of fabric snagged on a thorny bush. The violence was subtle, but unmistakable. Jedediah knelt by a patch of earth, disturbed deeply. Bloodstains darkened the sun-baked soil. They were fresh, still moist beneath the dying light. Naya's gaze hardened. They came in the night. No fire, no noise. They were deliberate. The truth settled between them like dust motes caught in shafts of fading sunlight. This was no simple disappearance. Malevolence had tipped the scales. Yet Jedediah's mind tangled with questions. Who would dare strike here, so close to his land? And why? Word had already begun to spread. In the settlement, wrapped in suspicion and fear, the murmurs branded Jedediah a traitor, a fool blinded by misplaced mercy. Some men spat words sharp enough to rip skin. Others watched from darkened doorways, their eyes hard and unforgiving. Whispers told stories of servants to the enemy, of cowardice cloaked in charity. Jedediah felt their weight, but his resolve held firm. "I'm protecting what's right, no matter the cost," he muttered to himself as the wind stirred dry leaves at his feet. Naya, sensing the rising storm outside, withdrew deeper into herself. The hardships of her people were carved into the lines of her face, but now layers of mistrust threatened to pull down the fragile bond between her and Jedediah. She had to guard her heart, her pain, lest it be used against both of them. That night, restless and on edge, Naya lay awake beneath a threadbare blanket. The small cabin felt suddenly claustrophobic, every creak magnified in the heavy darkness. Then, from beyond the thin walls, came movement. Shadows flickered just beyond the faded light of the fire. Shapes twisted and shifted. They were too dark, too jagged to be men. Eyes, gleaming faintly, glimmered like embers, watching from the trees' edge. Her breath caught. A chill crawled up her spine, fingers icy as the desert night. She glanced toward Jedediah's sleeping form, fumbling quietly for her hidden knife, heart pounding a fierce tattoo against ribs that yearned for peace. Outside, the wind whispered. Secrets older than the land, carrying the sound of soft footsteps, light, deliberate, circling the cabin's perimeter. Something was out there, waiting, watching, patient as the dusk. The air thickened with tension, every sense alive in a coil of dread and silent defiance. Naya stood, shadow merging with shadow, and peered through the window, narrowly spotting movement vanishing behind the gnarled trunks. Back inside, Jedediah stirred, sensing the shift. Their eyes met in the dark, unspoken understanding passing between them, trust forged not in comfort but in shared fear. "The shadows have come," Naya whispered, voice a jagged edge in the silence. Jedediah nodded grimly, reaching for his rifle. "Then we prepare." The night closed tightly around the cabin, dense and suffocating, as the unseen watchers lingered, waiting for the next move in the deadly game unfolding beneath the cold stars. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the desert held its breath. Soon, the strange movements, nothing human to the eye, would materialize into a threat that neither could ignore. The unseen eyes watching from the darkness promised a reckoning whose echoes would shatter the fragile peace they had barely begun to build. Callum appeared like a shadow at the edge of the barren clearing. His weathered hat pulled low against the glaring sun. The dust of the trail clung to his boots, and a keen sharpness flickered in his eyes, the kind only years of tracking and hunting could teach. Jedediah watched him approach with a wary hand resting near the grip of his rifle, the weight of prison suspicion still lingering like a fine dust between them. "I hear you're looking for answers." Callum's voice broke the tense silence, edged with that gruff certainty of a man who'd seen too many secrets buried beneath the soil. "Maybe I can help." Naya's gaze burned with quiet distrust, her hand almost instinctively sliding to the knife concealed beneath her ragged shawl. This stranger was a wild card, and in this land, wild cards could mean salvation or death. Jedediah nodded slowly, aware that despite Naya's reservations, they had little choice. "We're tracking what's left behind, the shadows that took her family." They set out together as the sun dipped behind the rocky ridges, casting long, twisted shadows across the cracked earth. Their path wound through dry thickets and tangled brush, the scent of sage and dust heavy in the air. With each cautious step, the forest closed in, a suffocating maze of thorn and silence. Callum led, his boots silent on the hard ground, eyes scanning the undergrowth for signs only the trained would notice. Jedediah kept close, muscles taut, while Naya moved like a ghost beside them, mindful of every sound and flicker among branches. Hours passed, marked only by the slow crawl of stars across a cold sky. In the firelight one night, as they paused beneath a skeletal oak, Callum finally spoke of Jedediah's past with a voice low and rough. "Lost your family to a raid, didn't you?" His gaze narrowed, reading the lines of grief etched deep into Jedediah's face. "I reckon that pain is what brings you to walk beside her now. Maybe you think you can spare her what you lost." Jedediah's throat tightened. Words hung, caught between shame and truth. "There's kinship in loss," he said quietly. "But this goes beyond blood." Naya listened, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. The wall she'd built cracked, just enough to let a flicker of empathy seep through. For the first time, the pain they shared was a bridge, not a barrier. Days into their journey, they came upon fresh signs that jagged the fragile calm. A torn fragment of fabric, snagged on a twisted bush, faint but unmistakably from Naya's family's garments. The soil bore tracks, muddled by recent rain, but sharpened by purpose. And there, near a fallen log, dark stains marred the earth. Still wet, crimson against the grays and browns of the woodland floor. Callum knelt beside the bleeding ground, his fingers tracing the faint imprint. "Ambush," he muttered grimly. "They didn't just disappear. They were hunted." Naya's lips tightened, shadows gathering behind her dark eyes. "By whom?" Callum's bitter laugh cracked the stillness. "That's the real question." A heavy silence settled, only broken by the rustle of dry leaves and distant cries of night creatures that seemed to whisper of dangers unseen. From beneath the canopy, Jedediah's thoughts turned dark. The community, with its hard lines of judgment and whispered threats, had never accepted his choice to shelter Naya. They eyed him now like a traitor, a man who'd chosen shadows over loyalty. Their harsh words had followed him here, carried on the wind like poisoned arrows. Naya's breath came steady, but the wariness inside her deepened. She sensed eyes in the darkness, hearts hostile as cacti thorns. Secrets lay heavy on her tongue, truths she dared not speak for fear they would shatter what little trust remained. One evening, as the trio camped beneath the stars, Naya sat close to the fire, gaze fixed on the flames. Her voice broke the silence with trembling resolve. "My family was caught between old debts and new hatred," she confessed softly. "There are those in this land who see us only as ghosts, to be erased." Jedediah's jaw clenched. "Then we stand not just against the desert, but against men's cruelty." Callum's eyes narrowed under the brim of his weathered hat. "And that cruelty runs deep. There's talk, dark whispers, that those responsible are from the settler community, men who'd rather see the land empty of Apache blood." The night air grew thick with the weight of unspoken threats. Naya's hand closed tightly around her knife, knuckles white. The memory of her family's laughter, now silence, spurred a fire undiminished by grief. Days later, as the dust settled after a harsh march, Callum stopped suddenly, raising a finger to his lips. Ahead, broken fence posts and scorched earth hinted at violence recent and raw. His voice was a tight whisper. "Tracks here show they came in force. Men from town, armed, organized. It wasn't a random raid. This was planned." Jedediah's heart hammered. The fragile line between neighbor and enemy crumbled. For the first time, Naya's resolve took shape as steel. "If they wanted us gone," she said through gritted teeth, "they've underestimated what survives in these lands." Their eyes met in the cold morning light, an unspoken oath exchanged amongst them. There was danger ahead. A darkness clawing at the edges of the old ways, threatening to engulf everything. As they prepared to press deeper into the wilderness where truth waited, the creeping fear tightened its grip. Callum pointed toward a narrow ravine, whispering harshly, "If we're right, this is where the ambush happened, and where your family may have found their last refuge." Jedediah nodded, swallowing the knot of dread in his throat. Their path ahead was no longer just a search. It was a descent into shadows, where men hunted men, and only the silent would survive. Together, they stepped forward into the thinning light. But in the darkness behind them, unseen eyes tracked their every move, and Callum's voice broke the still air, low and sharp. "This isn't just about the missing anymore. It's about who's willing to stop the killing." The wind carried the ominous truth like a chill across the bones of the land, as the threat festering within the community now stretched its fingers toward them all. The hunt had only just begun. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the dusty street where Jedediah stood at the edge of the settlement, his figure tense with a storm gathering inside him. The murmurs that had followed him with venomous persistence finally boiled over into confrontations steeped in scorn and accusation. "You're wasting your time," growled one of the settlers, a broad-shouldered man with sunburned skin and hardened eyes. Sheltering one of them invites nothing but trouble. Jedediah's jaw clenched, his gaze unwavering. "She's a woman without refuge. I'm doing what's right." Another voice erupted from a narrow alley. "Right? You're betraying your own blood, Jed. They're dangerous. Their kind brings death to this land, and you hide 'em like a traitor." Crowd's furnace of hostility built, voices roughening with suspicion and fear. Jedediah's hands clenched into fists, but he refused to answer with blows. Instead, A quiet resolve settled deep into his bones. He was no stranger to loss. He would protect what was just, come what may. Turning away from the angry sea of faces, Jedediah's boots carried him back toward his cabin. The air was thick with dust and the bitter tang of bitterness. But inside awaited a different kind of storm. Naya sat near the hearth, her silhouette outlined by flickering firelight. Her eyes, dark and distant, betrayed the weight she bore, memories that clung like chains. The silence between them was heavy, an unspoken gulf carved by grief and history. I confronted them, Jedediah said quietly, voice rough from strain. Naya nodded slowly, the flicker of pain sharpening in her gaze. They see me as a ghost, a threat to be erased. Her words were heavy with bitter truth. My family was caught in the crossfire of an ancient fight, she confessed, voice breaking like dry desert wind. A feud rooted long before any of this, between my kin and a faction bent on driving us from these lands. Jedediah sank onto a worn chair, rubbing his forehead as if trying to dispel an unseen weight. Old alliances shattered and resentments fester. That's a fire that burns through time. Naya's hands clenched around the edges of her shawl. We thought the past was buried, but it claws its way back, dragging us into a war no one wanted. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Our family, it was caught in the middle. Now, those who seek to finish it all have risen again. The room seemed to shrink beneath the burden of her words. Jedediah looked away, his gaze distant. The desert, relentless and unforgiving, echoed the unrest stirring around them. A sudden movement outside shattered their fragile calm. Both sprang to their feet, eyes sharp in the dimness. Jedediah's hand moved swiftly to his rifle, muscles taut. Naya edged toward the window, heart pounding with a haunting familiarity. Through the cracked glass, a shadow detached itself from the gathering dusk. Tall, cloaked, and masked by the deep hood of a heavy coat. The figure stood motionless, a dark sentinel blending with the encroaching night. Jedediah's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. Did you see that? Someone's watching. Naya's eyes narrowed, tracing the outline of the stranger's silhouette. They've returned. The threat is no longer just rumor. The wind whispered through the cracked window frame, carrying the scent of dry sage and something more sinister, the scent of impending danger. The cloaked figure's gaze, hidden but palpable, lingered fixedly on the cabin, like a hawk eyeing its prey. The moment stretched taut, the world holding its breath. Jedediah stepped back from the window. Tension knotted in every fiber. We're no longer just hunted. Now they're targeting us. Naya's grip tightened on the windowsill, knuckles white beneath worn fabric. They want to break us, shatter whatever hope remains. Her voice was steady but threaded with steel, the fire of survival blazing beneath her calm exterior. Outside, the figure retreated silently into the shadows, disappearing as swiftly as it had appeared, leaving behind an unsettling stillness. Jedediah exhaled slowly, the weight of the invisible threat pressing down like the desert heat at high noon. We can't wait for them to make their move. We have to act first. Naya met his gaze, the shared understanding settling between them, like a fragile truce in a war long past. Whatever comes, she said, we face it together. The night deepened, swallowing the land in darkness thick and absolute. Behind closed doors and whispered shadows, ancient grudges stirred anew. The fragile walls, both around the cabin and around their fragile trust, quivered on the brink of collapse. Within the silence, the promise of violence lingered, a storm gathering pace beyond sight. And watching from the blackened tree line, the hooded figure marked their every breath, every heartbeat, a predator patient and unyielding. The threat that haunted them was no longer distant. It had come home, ready to strike. The dawn light crept slowly through the cracks of the cabin's rough timber walls, casting a pale glow over two figures, Jedediah and Naya, still wound tight from the night's near ambush. The tension between them was sharper now, thick as the desert heat that pressed in from outside. The scent of dust and dry sage hung heavy in the air as their gaunt faces reflected the exhaustion born of sleepless hours and fragile trust. Jedediah rubbed the ache from his eyes, his voice low but steady. "We can't keep hiding like this. Whatever comes, it's only going to get worse if we stay isolated." His gaze locked with Naya's, searching for a flicker of agreement beneath the storm of pain and suspicion in her dark eyes. Naya's jaw tightened. Her voice was calm, but carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "I know a woman who knew the desert better than the sun knows the sky." She paused, the memory distant yet vivid, the smoldering hope ignited by this fierce ally. Tanya, she watches these lands with eyes sharper than any rifle. Jedediah's brows creased with thought. "You trust her? She's Apache, like me, and she's not afraid to kill. She knows the secrets in the rocks and shadows, the things hidden where no man ever bothers to look." Naya's voice lowered to a whisper. "She's the one who can help us understand what's really going on." The decision settled between them, like a spark threatening to ignite dry brush. Jedediah nodded. "If there's any chance to get ahead of this, we need her." Outside, the barren wind rattled the cabin door, a restless reminder of the threats stalking the outskirts of their fragile refuge. There was no time to lose. The sun climbed higher when they found Tana waiting just beyond the rim of the mesa, her figure stoic beneath the wide brim of a weathered hat. Her eyes, sharp and unapologetic, scanned them both, as if weighing their worth in a land where trust was as scarce as water. The faint scars along her sun-darkened skin told tales of battles fought and survived, a silent testament to the talents hidden beneath her quiet strength. "I heard whispers," Tana began before they spoke a word. "A trail cold as bones, and smoke from old fires that won't die. What brings you here?" Her voice was steady, a dagger wrapped in velvet. Jedediah stepped forward, his tone steady, but edged with urgency. "We're chasing ghosts, family vanished, and a darkness clawing at the edges of this land. We need to know what hunts us." Naya watched Tana closely, hesitant, but hoping her people's blood could forge a bond stronger than doubt. Tana's gaze pierced her, cold but calculating. Family lost means more than just grief. It can mean a war waiting to ignite. Tana's lips pressed thin, as if weighing the venom in some ancient grudge. "There's a broken truce, old as the bones buried beneath this earth. between tribes, between colonists, and it's cracking. Soon all will burn. The words hung heavy in the air, a shadow broad and dark. Jedediah swallowed hard, heart pounding like a desperate drum. This war, it's why your family disappeared? Tana nodded slowly, eyes flickering like embers. A fragile peace shattered. Some want the land cleansed. Others want retribution. And the innocents? They're caught between arrows aimed from every side. Naya's fingers clenched. The memory of laughter and faces now gone, sharpening the fire in her chest. We can't let that happen. Not again. The desert stretched vast and unforgiving beyond them, a brutal reminder of the stakes at hand. Tana's gaze softened just a fraction. Working together is the only way forward. But not all wounds heal with time. Some cut deep. Jedediah's voice was grim but resolute. We'll face those wounds, together. But even as hope flickered like a flame against the gathering dark, the unease between them was undeniable. Tana's presence brought new strength, but also new questions, new cracks in their fragile alliance. The desert's secrets were many, and none laid bare without a cost. As they departed toward the labyrinth of canyons and scrubland, Tana confided in a low voice, just loud enough for them to hear. The broken truce? It wasn't just forgotten. It was betrayed. Jedediah's eyes narrowed. By who? Tana's glance swept the horizon, eyes cold as stone. By those who stand to gain from this bloodshed. Men blinded by greed and old hatred. Their hands are deeper in this than you realize. Naya swallowed the bitter truth, but nodded, steeling herself for the tempest rising. The alliances they once took for granted were now fragile threads, fraying under unseen tension. As the three figures vanished into the brush, the desert, wind turned fierce, carrying with it a whisper that slithered through the bones of the earth. The quiet between them was broken by Tana's last warning, sharp and clear. This really isn't just about survival. It's about stopping a war no one asked for. The sun dipped behind distant buttes, casting long shadows that swallowed the land in half-light. Somewhere beneath the deepening sky, the fragile truce crouched, ready to explode. And unbeknownst to them all, eyes hidden in the gathering darkness watched with merciless intent, waiting for the moment the fragile peace would shatter. The secret shadow of betrayal waited, looming close. The storm was coming. The harsh desert sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked earth as Jedediah and Naya stood face to face beneath the oppressive sky. The truth they had stumbled upon burned between them, like the unforgiving heat. A group of ruthless hunters, led by a local farmer whose hate ran deeper than the wells were dry, had orchestrated the disappearance of Naya's family. It was no accident, no desperate loss to the wilderness. They had been targeted, hunted like prey, by men blinded by greed and vengeance. Jedediah's weathered hands clenched into fists, trembling with a mixture of anger and helplessness. "This changes everything," he said, voice low and urgent. "They're not just killing to claim land. They want to erase an entire people." Naya's dark eyes, usually so guarded and full of sorrow, now burned with the fierce flame of rage. "They think they can burn out our stories," she said quietly, her voice taut with something unyielding. "But ashes still carry memory. We will not vanish. Their fragile trust, so carefully forged amid wounds and whispered fears, now found itself fractured in the face of this looming brutality. Jedediah's brow furrowed as he grappled with the weight of their choices. We have to be smart. We can't simply fight fire with fire. This war will consume us both if we're not careful. Naya looked away briefly, a shadow crossing her face. The desert wind stirred the dust, carrying the scent of sage and decay. You want to protect me, protect the people, but your way it is bloody and slow. I've seen what waiting does. Sometimes, survival means moving faster than the enemy expects. A cold silence stretched between them, heavy with the unspoken fears that had grown alongside their alliance. Jedediah's voice softened. I don't know the way, Naya. Not yet. But I swear I'll walk it with you, together. The sun dipped lower, casting long, gnarled shadows across the dusty ground. Somewhere beyond the hills, the restless land seemed to hold its breath in grim anticipation. Their conflict wasn't just between hunter and hunted. It was a clash of survival instincts, of cultures shaped by trauma and suspicion. Jedediah, rooted in stoic endurance. Naya, sharpened by the raw necessity of swift action. Neither could afford to betray their nature, yet both understood their fates were intertwined. As the last light bled from the sky, the brittle silence was shattered by the sound of horses approaching from the horizon, their rhythmic gallop echoing like a heartbeat through the empty valley. Naya's eyes snapped open, a warning flaring to life deep within. The moon's not full yet, she murmured, voice thick with dread. But the message has come. My tribe, an attack is coming. They plan to strike when the next moon rises. Jedediah's jaw tightened. Then waiting is no longer an option. He stepped closer, voice steady but heavy. We have to prepare. There isn't much time. For a moment, they stood united against the vast silence, the desert night stretching endlessly around them, the fragile threads of trust held taut by mutual fear and necessity now pulled tight against an impending storm. Naya's hand closed tightly around the worn leather strap of her satchel, knuckles whitening as she swallowed hard. If we do nothing, it will be blood spilled without mercy. If we act, we may survive. The wind whispered through the canyon like a ghostly chorus, carrying with it the weight of things yet to come. Jedediah met her gaze, a silent vow passing between them. The long, bitter night ahead would mark the true test of their alliance. And in the distance, beneath the cold gaze of an unforgiving sky, a shadowed messenger carried the word of war. The attack was set for the next full moon. The air inside the cabin was thick with unspoken tension as Jedediah paced the creaking floorboards, the weight of his choice heavy on his broad shoulders. Outside, the desert lay silent but hostile, unforgiving as always. He had made his decision to seek the counsel of the community, to ask for support in the face of a threat that was no longer distant rumor, but a dangerous reality. Naya watched silently from beside the fire, her sharp eyes tracing the flickering shadows. Her heart thudded with a blend of fear and resolve. This step was perilous. The settlers viewed her as an enemy, a ghost to be erased, and Jedediah as a traitor for sheltering her. Yet, standing still was no longer an option. Jedediah's heavy boots snapped against the cracked earth as he made his way toward the heart of the settlement, under a sun that stained the sky a merciless blue. The town buzzed with murmurs of distrust and veiled hostility, the kind that clung to skin like the dust that never seemed to wash away. Conversations faltered when he approached, eyes darting with suspicion, whispers rising like dry wind through the wooden corridors of storefronts and porches. At the council hall, a weather-beaten building sagging under decades of desert storms, Jedediah's voice rang out firm but measured. "There's a darkness stalking this land," he said, his gaze steady despite the murmurs. "My family is gone. Naya's family vanished without a trace. This is no famine or wandering. It's a hunt, and it won't stop unless we face it together." Murmurs grew louder, some voices sharp with anger. One man spat, "Why blame us for what's barely beyond our reach? We've no quarrel with your Apache." Another, colder, hissed, "Sheltering her only invites chaos." Jedediah's jaw tightened. "We share this land," he insisted. "If we don't stand united, none of us will survive what's coming." The room fell heavy, breaths held between hope and fear. Back at the cabin, Naya prepared herself to cross a different kind of wilderness. The web of old alliances and new suspicions within her own people. She wrapped her shawl tighter, the fabric worn, but a shield against more than the biting wind. Her heart beat with the urgency that only those who carry a people's future can know. The journey to the Apache Council was fraught with memories and warnings. Naya moved through the desert with the grace of one born to these lands, each step measured and mindful. The earth beneath her feet seemed to pulse with the stories of her ancestors, stories she could no longer afford to ignore. In the shadowed confines of the council tent, elders gathered with faces carved by time and eyes sharp like hawks. Their silence was formidable, a wall of history and judgment. Naya stepped forward, voice steady though her insides roiled. "The hunters who took my family threaten us all. Jedediah seeks peace, but we must be ready to defend what remains." A low murmur rippled through the group, some elders nodding with wary agreement, others tightening their lips in silent skepticism. Then from the back, a grizzled elder leaned forward, voice slow but heavy with meaning. "Trust is fragile. Blood is thicker than words, but it can also stain. Beware the traitors who walk among us." Naya's heart clenched. The warning was clear. Betrayal lurked closer than she dared admit. Yet the need for allies overrode the fear. Days passed in a delicate balance of preparation and fragile dialogue. The settlers' council remained doubtful, suspicion lingering like a stubborn fog. Within the tribe, whispers of dissent and hidden agendas festered. Naya bore the silent burden of knowing that not all who sat beside her were truly allies. Every glance carried double meaning. Every step in the shadowed canyons could be watched by unseen eyes. One restless night, as a pale moon cast silver streaks across the dusty landscape, Naya's path crossed with an old friend, one whose loyalty had been tested by time and blood. "They're watching," Taina warned, voice barely above a whisper, her gaze flickering toward the distant tree line. "There's a traitor among us, feeding the enemy their every move." Naya swallowed hard, the weight of the revelation settling like stone in her stomach. We must act before it's too late. Meanwhile, Jedediah sensed the growing storm back in the settlement. Faces once neutral hardened, alliances fractured, as fear turned neighbor against neighbor. Every word he spoke was met with suspicion. Every gesture scanned for weakness. Yet he stood firm. The flicker of hope he carried, a flame daring to survive the desert night. The days became a tense dance of strategy and secrecy. Plans were whispered beneath rustling leaves. Promises weighed against the odds. The fragile thread connecting settler and Apache, taut, threatened to snap under the strain of whispered betrayals and mounting danger. At the edge of the tribe's camp, beneath the spreading shadow of ancient junipers, the council's debates spun in circles. Trust questioned, loyalty questioned. The presence of a traitor cast long shadows over every decision. As the cycle of days wound closer to the fated night, Naya's resolve stiffened. The knowledge that their enemies had spies within their ranks left no room for hesitation. In the stillness before dawn, as the cold girl stars began to wink awake, Naya's whispered words sliced through the chill air like a blade. "The enemy knows our moves. Time is against us." Behind her, the flicker of torchlight danced in the gathering darkness, revealing faces etched with worry and determination. The fragile alliance trembled on the brink of collapse, and from the depths of the shadows, a betrayal whispered itself to life, its venom ready to poison them all. The clash erupted beneath a searing sky, dust swirling like ghosts between the two forces, facing each other with grim resolve. The farmers' men, grim-faced, armed with rifles and calloused wrath, lined the cracked road, while Jedediah, Naya, and their ragged band of allies took position behind sparse cover, hearts pounding beneath the weight of desperate hope and fierce defiance. The air, thick with the scent of sweat, gunpowder, and parched earth, pulsed with the promise of violence. Shots cracked, sharp as lightning bolts, shattering the tense silence. Bullets bit through dry brush and juked between weathered boards, sending clouds of dirt skyward. Each side counted losses with aching hands. Screams hollow under the relentless sun. Jedediah crouched low, rifle steady, eyes scanning for threats as he fought not just for survival, but for a fragile trust still coiled between him and Naya. Beside him, Naya moved like a shadow, her arrows swift and true, striking down threats with a precision born of loss and fury. Her dark eyes flickered past pain to the fire of resolve, a warrior born for this crucible. The dust rose in choking clouds as her voice cut across the chaos, calling out for allies, urging them to hold, to resist the tide of hatred that sought to drown them. Amid the fury, Taina led a small group, her nimble movements weaving between foes and friends alike. Her presence was a steady beacon, a reminder that alliances forged in pain could blaze bright and fierce life, as if the very shadows conspired. From that darkness emerged the cloaked figure first glimpsed long ago, a man whose presence sent a cold shiver through the hearts of friend and foe. His hood shrouded intent and name alike, but his menace spoke volumes. He strode through smoke and rubble toward Jedediah and Nea, steps measured like a harbinger of ruin. Their eyes locked at the battle's zenith, time fracturing into moments thick with dread. Jedediah, gun arm trembling from exhaustion and pain, refused to yield. Nea's breath came hard and fast, her grip loosening as the swelling storm of the firefight tore at her calm. The man approached, silence dragging behind him like a funeral shroud. Suddenly, an explosion of desperation, the cloaked figure lunged, blade flashing, the clash echoing above the roar of gunfire. Jedediah stumbled, a searing agony blooming across his side, as a bullet, or was it the knife, found its mark. The world blurred. The howl of pain swallowed his senses as he dropped to one knee. Blood seeped like a dark promise, staining dust and hope alike. Naya's scream fractured the air, raw and wild. She dove to his side, knees sinking into the gritty soil as she pressed trembling hands to the wound. The heat of his blood soaking her fingers. Her eyes, wide with terror and defiance, met the encroaching night around them. The battle raged, but for this fragile moment, all that mattered was the man bleeding beneath her hands, man who had become both shield and hope. Her mind raced, choices tormenting her, fight on or tend to the life hanging by a thread. The enemy pressed close, the growl of gunfire creeping nearer, shadowed faces closing in like vultures. Time twisted cruel and unyielding. With flames of resolve brightening her gaze, Naya rose, supporting Jedediah's faltering weight. Her voice, laced with iron and fear, carried an ultimatum whispered only to the night. I will not lose him, not here, not now. The world seemed to hold its breath as she glanced toward the horizon, where the battle's tides ebbed and flowed, and death gazed hungrily from every corner. Every step forward was a gamble against fate narrowing its grip. Behind them, the cloaked figure paused, eyes dark and unreadable, as if weighing Naya's determination. Then a slow retreat into shadows. The wind caught the faint scent of blood and dust, swirling the desert's endless expanse into a swirling canvas of pain and hope. Jagged breaths rattled between Naya and Jedediah, defiance etched into every line of their battered forms. The night loomed heavy and imminent, a silent witness to the desperate choice she must make. And as his life flickered dangerously close to the edge, Naya's chilling decision took form. A choice that would seal the fate of them all. The night's weight pressed down heavily, but Naya's gaze burned brighter than the dark. The cloaked figure stepped from the shadows at last, the flicker of a hidden past. In his cold eyes, his voice sliced through the tense silence, low and bitter. You want to know why your family vanished? He spat. Because of the debts they owed, debts of blood and betrayal that refused to die. Naya's breath stilled as a shock rippled through her. This was more than a faceless enemy. The man's words cracked open a wound, no one else had dared touch. Jedediah's hand tightened on his rifle, but his voice held calm steel. "Speak your truth, then. We're ready." The figure hesitated, the hood slipping just enough to reveal the haunted lines of a man marked by years of secret grudges. "I was once kin to your people, a brother lost to hate. When your family stood against those who sought to drive us out, I was forced to act, to silence the past and protect what remained." Naya's eyes flared with fury and pain. "You betrayed blood, family." His gaze fell. "I did what I thought necessary to survive. But you're right. Those shadows have not only hunted your kin, but devoured what little trust there was." The heaviness of his confession settled on the air like a suffocating dust. Yet the truth, raw and jagged, sparked a fragile thread of understanding. Jedediah stepped forward slowly, voice steady. "The trail cuts deep, but it doesn't have to be the end. What path do you seek now?" The man looked away, conflicted, the weight of his sins a visible chain. Redemption or death. Before another word could fall, a crackling gunshot shattered the quiet, a reminder that enemies lurked still. Naya didn't hesitate. She knelt beside Jedediah, pressing her hands where the sharp pain bloomed. "We survive this together." Her fierce determination galvanized the weary fighters gathered around. The battle had scarred them all, but now was the time to gain what they had lost: justice and peace. In the fading moonlight, Naya confronted the cloaked man once more. "If we are to stop this cycle, you must stand with us, not against us." He lowered his weapon slowly, a nod of reluctant acceptance marking a turning point. Back in the settlement, word of the confrontation spread swiftly. The community, shaken by the truth and the bravery of those who stood against hatred, began to crack its long-held prejudices. Old fears gave way to cautious dialogues. Walls built on suspicion began to crumble, revealing the possibility of alliance. Naya and Jedediah, their bond forged in fire and blood, made their way to the heart of the settlement. Their presence was a silent challenge and a beacon of fragile hope. Together, they declared a pact, a solemn vow of mutual protection and understanding. "Let this land be ours all." Jedediah spoke, voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Not divided by fear or blood, but united by the will to survive, to rebuild. Naya's voice joined his, steady and unwavering. "The desert is harsh, but it teaches endurance. We honor those we lost by, building a future stronger than the hate that tried to tear us apart." The crowd was quiet, the weight of their words sinking deep. Among whispered agreements and exchanged glances, the first threads of community began to weave anew. Days turned to weeks, and slowly healing began. Those scars remained. They served as reminders, markers of a journey through darkness into light. In the early dawn, Jedediah and Naya stood side by side outside the cabin, gazing out over the endless horizon where the sky met the land in a wide, gentle embrace. The sun rose golden and sure, washing over the desert with warmth and promise. Naya broke the silence softly. "This is only the beginning, but at last we step forward, not as enemies, but as guardians." Jedediah nodded, eyes reflecting the steady flame of hope. Together, the wind stirred, carrying the scent of sage and earth, whispering tales of resilience and the enduring spirit of those who dared to dream beyond the scars. In the fragile peace that settled over the land, a new day dawned, a quiet testament to survival, compassion, and the courage to rewrite a legacy once shadowed by loss. And as the first light gilded the rugged landscape, Jedediah and Naya walked slowly back to the cabin, united by their pact, their pasts no longer chains, but roots from which hope would bloom. The desert, vast and unforgiving, held its breath, and then exhaled, welcoming the promise of healing beneath an endless sky.